Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Winter Wolf's Den. Winter Wolf here, gonna touch base with you guys on House of the Dragon, episode 3. I'm a little late on this one, I do apologize, but all the same, I ask if you leave a comment below if you've seen House of the Dragon and you're liking it, and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so I can give you more ongoing coverage. Anyway, I think Game of Thrones it's hit its mark, guys. I think that episode 3, I'm excited to talk about it today with you guys, because I think it's building on some of the setups from the first 2 episodes, as well as progressing the plot, always marching forward, which is something you really need in all forms of creative fiction. You always need to be advancing the story. You can't give up the fluff and then consider that story development. It just doesn't work. I'll give you the quick breakdown of the episode. We get another time jump. We're 3 years later after the events of episode 2. The king has married Lady Alicent Hightower. She's pregnant with their second child. They already have a firstborn. It is a son, and the episode kind of takes place around his second naming day. So the backdrop of the episode really is how everybody's coming to terms with assuming the king is going to let the other shoe drop on his eldest daughter Rhaenyra about being disappointed as heir to the kingdom. And you see a lot of the politicking that goes on in the various court scenes where people are approaching him, offering advice, offering marriage proposals for Rhaenyra to see if they can, strengthen their familial positions by linking up with the Targaryen house and just solidifying alliances with the throne. There's a lot of good character work that comes of that, especially during the they're holding a hunt, like the royal hunt for the festival of the newborn, or not newborn, he's 2, but of the prince's naming day, like it's his birthday feast kind of thing. And you get a couple of those old Game of Thrones style things where the ladies are sitting around one place having their tea and their cakes, and the men are doing their council thing in the other place. But you get a varied perspective about what's going on in the world of Westeros and who's trying to align with who and what the complaints are. A couple of the really cool scenes that I liked that I thought really hit home the progression of story that were really well, and other scenes that just had character development that we don't really get to see in other shows that are currently out there. I'd like to point out Lady Alicent, or Queen Alicent now, however the title works, is coming along very nicely. She stepped effectively into the role as queen. Her transition from being Rhaenyra's handmaiden into the second or third most powerful figure in the realm, it's interesting to see because her demeanor remains about the same. She does impose her will a little bit more forcefully in a couple of places, but she's not exactly like a shrinking wallflower that she might have been perceived as in the first place. So it's cool to see them bring her along gradually into that kind of setting. You get a lot more good character work with the king himself. Paddy Constance, I'm sorry, I don't remember the actor's name, but the gentleman that plays the king, he's really turning it on in episode 3. We get to see a little bit of his descent into some depression and some second guessing on the decisions he's made regarding who he's appointed as heir and the situation with his brother Daemon going off to fight his war in the Stepstones with Lord Corlys Velaryon. So we get to see him actually have some grief and some conflict, and it's reflected really well, the different angles of his shortcomings as king and his concerns with the decisions that he's made as he bounces the various situations off the hand, off his daughter, off his new wife, and off other members of court. And you really get to see the actor lay out the craft pretty well. It's a compelling performance, and I did enjoy it. Particularly, he has a scene in front of a bonfire near the end of the hunt where he speaks with his wife about second guesses and things that he should have done or didn't do. You get a lot of good work there. We get a lot of good work out of Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole in this episode as well. At one point, Rhaenyra has an argument, like a public argument, with her father, the king, in front of everybody assembled within the feasting hall, and she ends up running off into the King's Wood. She rides off. She's horseback at that point, and Criston Cole trails her in there. And after they catch up and avoid plunging into a lake, they kind of have their own little B plot arc that they go with, where she gives out her complaints about, woe is me, I'm the princess, I have it so hard. And then he points out, yeah, everybody in the realm would gladly trade places with you. So they give her the whiny female stuff, but it's tropey almost. Like it's part of like the coming of age story that you get in these kind of, for lack of a better word, for fairy tales, where there's always the prince or the princess that thinks that they have it so rough comparatively to, the common guy. And it's just a matter of perspective, and Kristen Cole does a pretty good job of illustrating that fact. And where their story takes a really interesting point, the spoilers ahead, that's how usually I roll, guys, so apologies if you haven't seen it. Disappear and come back, please, I'd love to have you. They get into a little tussle at their campfire with a boar that kind of just rolls up on their site, and they had an opportunity here to go the Mary Sue route with Rhaenyra, and they didn't do it. And in typical Game of Thrones fashion, I think they kind of they foreshadowed future points of conflict for down the line, and basically it goes down like the boar rolls up on the campsite, temporarily disables Sir Kristen Cole, her bodyguard, with a bit of a charge, throws him off his feet and knocks him down, and then it basically pounces on her. So at that exact second, if it's 2018, 2020, you're thinking, okay, Princess Rhaenyra is gonna, pull the short blade out and just shank it up, and she'll end up saving Kristen Cole and bringing him back to the hunt and yada yada, girl power, Mary Sue, Captain Marvel. But they don't. She struggles with the boar, which is, 400-pound boar aside, like, it's fiction, you gotta suspend some disbelief. But she basically holds it off until Kristen Cole regains himself, and then he stabs him through with the longsword and mortally wounds it. So she gets herself together, Rhaenyra gets herself together, pushes the boar off, and then draws her own, short knife and just has a psycho moment and just freaks out and stabs it all the way to death. You got blood spraying up on the blonde hair, and she looks like a psycho badass at that point. But they purposefully did it in a way where she needed his help or she would have died. Like, that's a realistic thing. Outside of him getting mauled by a 400-pound boar would have broken both of his legs, and then if it dropped on her, she'd be dead inside of 3 seconds, because boars are something that are hunted in parties, with dogs and multiple armed men. But you suspend enough of it for it to be at least believable, and the whole thing works. Because at the end of the episode, when they're returning to camp, they're dragging the boar's carcass in as like an offering to the king of the hunt, for the celebration. And you look around, the music hits, and you got some of the faces of the men that are assembled in the yard, the butchers, the other soldiers, the hedge knights, and everything. And they're kind of giving her the yep, all right then. She's earned a modicum of respect for having returned bloodied, with the bloody dagger and the boar's carcass and whatnot. But deep down, she's gonna know that it's kind of a fake respect. Like, they don't know, or they won't know, that Kristen Cole's the one that actually basically killed it, and she just kind of got that last couple stabs in out of anger and frustration and rage and everything else. But the perception that they'll all have of her is that, okay, all right, she's a little tougher than we thought she was. So there's layers there, and that's what makes Game of Thrones great, is it's always, they're showing you one thing, but there's subtext of different things that have happened and can happen, which was pretty good. Another key tie into that plays right into Rhaenyra. This is definitely a Rhaenyra episode, except for the last segment. Is the purpose of the hunt at this point is to capture and kill the White Hart, which is basically the white stag from Chronicles of Narnia and the other Arthurian legends, things like that. And they pursue for a few days, and the king's going through his bit of which heir, did I make the right decision naming Rhaenyra heir, or should I rename my son heir? And when they finally capture the stag that's in pursuit, after having heard all episode long that that the White Hart is a mark of divinity before the dragon showed up, the white stag was the mark of the the divine right to rule kind of thing. And the stag that they captured, though magnificent and 48-point antlers and massive and needing ropes tied to either side of the crown of antlers to hold it in place and everything so the king can do the death stroke with the spear. It's not the white stag. It's brown. It's just it's a regular one, but it's just massive. So he kind of half-heartedly, in his hungover state, because he's been sloshed all episode, he kind of just gets a couple of jabs in, and he looks weak and ineffectual when he does it, and he doesn't want to be there. And after he does it, he gets the golf clap, and it comes across as fairly pathetic, and you're like, oh. All right, so he had been kind of tripping balls that the white stag was around for his son's birth, but then it wasn't, so I did make the right decision with Rhaenyra, so I'm relieved, but I'm also not relieved, because maybe a part of him wanted to make the son heir to put the kingdom's mind at ease. But then, after that setup, when Kristen Cole and Rhaenyra are overlooking kind of the festival from a hillside far off, and they're heading back, who shows up on their little precipice checking them out but the white stag. And the CGI is a little shaky, but the music hits, the lighting hits, and you're like, okay, this is their moment where it's like, okay, she's actually the chosen one. It's supposed to be her. She's already been selected. Now she just has to stay selected. And then in a part that I thought was even better development for the character, whether or not she even realizes what she did, is Kristen Cole reaches for the sword like he's gonna take down the White Hart and bring it back. She orders him to let it go. And so the stag does its stately beast, head nod thing, and then heads back into the forest, it was pretty. I thought it was cool. It was kind of touching that she let it go, because had she rolled back in there with its, with the head, she'd been like, yeah, so it's me, I'm the chosen one or whatever. But they let that slide. So I thought there was good development there between the two of them down the entire stretch. And that brings me. I'm going to wrap up on the last segment here, guys. And this I thought was pretty fun. It's an example of a battle scene that aesthetically looks really cool. It has cool setups, but the strategy behind the battle just doesn't work. And anybody that's, even if you're not like an expert in siege warfare, if you've read fantasy before, or you kind of just think it through a little bit, the elements of the battle don't work, even though it looks good. They want us to believe that 3 years into this siege of the Stepstones, that somehow Corlys and Daemon Targaryen didn't have the resources to just end the crab feeder and go home, victorious. So we get a setup scene, like a little miniature council on one of the miniature on an atoll somewhere, with Corlys and his men and Daemon, who's skyborn and kind of just roasting shit, but he's not having any luck burning them out. So their council that they're having is basically like, it's Corlys' brother, and he's like, well, what has this guy done for us? He's dragged us out here. We're getting our asses kicked. We're running out of supplies and resources and things, and we can't hold out much longer. And they devised this plan where they're supposed to be, they want to send somebody in as bait to surrender, and hopefully it's a high value person enough to bait the crab feeder and his men out of the caves long enough to get roasted. And Daemon overhears this, and he's kind of there in the background as these guys are discussing options. And then lo and behold, who shows up but a messenger from King Viserys, who earlier had decided he'd finally lend aid to his brother and Corlys and show the crown's commitment to his people, even though it wasn't a decision that he made to go to war with the Triarchy and the Stepstones. Daemon gets pissed, beats the messenger down with his helmet. It has to basically be like pulled off of him. And then he goes ahead and he executes the plan, which was basically to go to fly or to row over to the crab feeder's position alone and basically unarmored, or lightly armored and basically unarmed, and offer up a surrender. So he does that, and he gets all cinematic, and it's kind of a good setup, and you're kind of nervous because this is Game of Thrones. The good guy, not that he's a total good guy, but the protags die. And he gets there, and of course it's a ruse. When the guy that goes out to accept the surrender goes to take Daemon's sword, and he's kind of offered it up in like the submissive form there. Daemon pulls the boot-mounted dagger and just chops him up and goes to work. And then he basically John Wicks his way with his sword up the beach, cutting dudes down. The crab feeder orders archer fire, and Daemon just like weaving in and out of obstacles and debris on the beach and bodies. And he's just cutting dudes down as he gets up the beach. He has a couple of really cool moments, a couple of good combat moves that are really fun to watch. And finally, arrows start to catch up with him. He takes a couple, and he gets he ends up going down for a quick bit. He takes one through the calf or the lower part of the knee, and you're thinking he's done. This is his Game of Thrones death, and he's done. He drags himself into cover, and after he has like that moment of clarity or the epiphany that the suicide mission is a suicide mission. He walks out like he's going to face all the guys that the crab feeder is now unleashed onto the beach to claim their prize. And then out of absolutely effing nowhere, in the biggest Deus Ex moment ever committed in Game of Thrones, I think, Rhaenyra Velaryon on Seasmoke the Dragon, like a kind of a bulkier white dragon, like a more typical Dungeons and Dragons looking thing, just shows up and strafes everybody surrounding Daemon on the beach. And of course, as he's doing that, Corlys and the rest of his ground forces, they've apparently rode behind Daemon already. Like they've rode over to that island, so their forces storm the beach. And they end up putting the crab feeder's little rebellion down. We get to see Daemon Targaryen pursue the crab feeder, who I think just made his peace with his lot in life, because he heads into a cave all slow-mo, just walks in there, and then they little battle on the beach. Corlys, absolutely smashes dudes up with like the axe and whatnot. And Daemon comes out of the cave, dragging a half torso and one arm of the crab feeder behind him, and he just plunks him down like, yep, we're done here. And at first I thought I'd really like to see that fight, like it might have been good, but we never led to know that the crab feeder was a warrior or anything like that. He was just the mastermind behind the rebellion or the pirates or whatnot. So maybe I didn't really need to see that fight. It might just have been cool, but it looked okay. And then they kind of wrap up on that. You know, Daemon has his moment. He's won the war. He didn't need the brothers' help because the brother, King Viserys, was going to send 20 some odd ships and 2,000 foot soldiers and just crush the rebellion altogether. But he gets the job done, so it sets up for the next episode, for episode 4. It's another time jump. I think it's a year later, and you guys can stick around. I don't want to ruin the after credits stuff. You can just take a look at that and see that the situation will definitely have changed between Daemon and his brother at that point. But my sticking point for that battle is they wanted me to believe that the crab feeders army that had been an army, it's rebellion. They've been on the Stepstones for years. They're being resupplied by the free cities on the other end of wherever they're holed up, and that somehow with 2 dragons, not 1 but 2, Daemon and Corlys couldn't figure out a way to destroy their supply lines and then either starve them out of the caves or burn them out. And I thought it was kind of foolish because one of the things they specifically say in the council meeting before that battle was that the crab feeders guys have been disrupting their supply lines. And I'm like, well, how the fuck did that happen? Like, how did they manage to get around you and your dragons and your patrols to cut your lines when they're basically like the rabble living in the rocks and they're not, perfectly supplied? They're not armored troops. They have no dragons. They didn't show us any ships from the free cities. They wanted us to believe that this position that they had created their choke points in managed to keep the dragons at bay with like regular archer fire, and no ballistas, no heavy weapons. And we actually see early in the episode when the archers shoot at Daemon Targaryen's dragon, the dragon just kind of basically like folds wings up and like basically blocks them. So I didn't really, tactically I enjoyed it to watch because the aesthetics were cool, but the writer part in the back of my brain was like, dude, you should have storyboarded this a little different. Like, some of this shit just doesn't work, and you could have planned better against that. But all in all, I really enjoyed the episode. A lot of people are saying that it was kind of a slow burn. I didn't see it. It's Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones was always well-paced. There's always the politicking. There's always the character build and the relationships that get established and destroyed and reforged and everything else. Like, it wasn't until the end of Game of Thrones, if you remember, when the big battle scenes really came into prominence, and that's kind of when the rest of Game of Thrones went to shit. So if this is going to mimic more season 1 through 4 of Game of Thrones with smaller personalized stories and every now and again some small to medium scale combat, like when Ned Stark eventually got captured in King's Landing by the Gold Cloaks and the Lannisters or whatnot, like, you want to give me some 15 on 15 in an alley, like that fight I'll watch. But I don't need everything to be Lord of the Rings level battles with like massive cavalry charges and like dragons strafing, because once you go to the well too many times on that, it's just kind of like, you're not going to enjoy it down the stretch. But the character work, if it's good, will always be something people will come back to watch. People will always go back to watch early Game of Thrones to see Tyrion piss from the top of the wall while he's talking with Jon Snow. They'll always come back to see Varys talking with Ned Stark in the black cell beneath the palace. They'll always come back to see things like the Red Wedding, or Joffrey's death, things like that. But you once you've seen a dragon strafe a battlefield, it's kind of like you've played that card, and you can't just rely on that kind of thing. There really needs to be a foundation to those things, otherwise it gets old quick. That's all I got from me on this one, guys. I appreciate you stopping by for a longer review of House of the Dragon episode 3. Smash a like, give me a comment, subscribe to the channel because I'll be covering this through its entire run because I am enjoying this show. I'll give you guys She-Hulk probably Thursday afternoon, and then I'll catch up with Rings of Power, which is hopefully that picks up because I'm really not enjoying that so far. But I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. See you guys later.